All my life, I was told that fashion was just a childish fantasy. Real careers don't come from sewing and sketching, my father would say, rolling his eyes. Designing clothes won't pay the bills, my mother chimed in, every single time I tried to show them my work. And for a long time, I almost believed them. Almost. Until the day I received the letter. I remember standing in the narrow hallway of our small house, clutching the envelope so tightly my knuckles turned white. The logo printed at the top, Vincenza Atelier, New York City, shimmered under the ceiling light like a promise I wasn't sure I deserved. My heart hammered in my chest as I ripped it open. Dear Melissa, it began. We are thrilled to offer you an internship at Vincenza Atelier's main office in Manhattan. Congratulations. I gasped, covering my mouth with my hand. Tears blurred the words on the page. I had done it. I had made it. This was more than an internship, it was my dream, breathing, alive, waiting for me. I could almost hear the whir of sewing machines, the bustling chatter backstage, the scent of fresh fabric and new beginnings. Mom! Dad! I shouted, bursting into the living room. They were sitting there, side by side, my mother knitting, my father reading the news. Ordinary. Predictable. Safe. I got it. I cried, waving the letter like a victory flag. I'm going to New York. They picked me. For a second, just one, I thought I saw something flicker across their faces. Pride? No. It was something colder. Harder. Without a word, my mother reached for the letter. I handed it to her, heart pounding, waiting for the smile, the hug, the moment they would finally see me. Really see me. She read the first line, scoffed, and tore the letter cleanly in two. Enough with this nonsense, she said flatly. You're going to law school this fall, just like we planned. I stood frozen, staring at the pieces of my future fluttering to the floor like dead leaves. I opened my mouth to speak, to scream, to beg, but no sound came out. Inside me, something crumbled. The little girl who had stayed up nights sketching gowns by flashlight, she died a quiet death right there in that beige living room. But something else stirred. Something sharper. Something unbreakable. I bent down, picking up the torn halves of the letter with trembling hands. I didn't say a word. Not because I agreed. But because in that moment I realized they would never believe in me. Not until I forced them to. Later that night, lying awake in the darkness, I stared at the ceiling and made myself a promise. If they won't give me permission to chase my dream, I whispered to no one, I'll chase it anyway. And I'll win. The silence pressed against me, heavy and certain. But for the first time it didn't scare me. It fueled me. The next morning I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the piles of law school brochures spread out before me. My father sat across from me, sipping his black coffee, his expression as solid and unmoving as stone. You'll thank us one day, he said, tapping the glossy cover of one of the brochures. Security. Stability. A real future. I nodded. Or at least, my head moved up and down. Inside, I was screaming. Security. Stability. It sounded like a prison sentence. As they discussed applications and deadlines, my mind wandered, drifted into the world I loved, the world they refused to see. I imagined myself sketching again, fingertips smudged with charcoal, fabric samples covering my tiny New York apartment. Late nights designing, early mornings hustling to meetings, the electric thrill of seeing my name stitched into a tag for the first time. That dream flickered in front of me like a candle struggling against the wind. And I knew one thing with brutal certainty. I couldn't let them snuff it out. Not this time. I'll do it their way, I thought grimly, until I can do it mine. The first day of law school felt like walking into a funeral for my soul. Everyone wore black suits and carried heavy briefcases. No one smiled. I sat in the back row of a cavernous lecture hall doodling gown designs in the margins of my notepad while the professor droned on about tort reform and contracts. My classmates took furious notes. I drew silk trains and jeweled necklines. They memorized cases. I imagined runway lights and flashing cameras. It wasn't rebellion. It was survival. One afternoon, after another mind-numbing lecture, I found myself wandering through a tiny bookstore tucked between two towering office buildings downtown. It smelled like old paper and hope. Hidden among the thick law textbooks, I found a slim, colorful book titled, Building Your Brand, Fashion Entrepreneurs Tell All. I froze. My heart raced as I pulled it from the shelf, cradling it like something sacred. I flipped through the pages, devouring the stories of women like me, who had started with nothing but a dream and carved out empires. One line stood out, burning into my mind. If they say no, build your own doors. I closed the book, pressed it to my chest, and made a decision. I would build my doors. Quietly. patiently, brick by invisible brick. And one day, when they least expected it, I would walk through them, head held high. That night, I lay awake again, tracing invisible patterns on the ceiling with my finger. Dreaming. Planning. A whisper inside me grew louder. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled in the dark. By day, I was a law student, quiet, diligent, invisible. By night, I became something else entirely. I sketched designs under the covers of my narrow dorm room bed, using the faint light of my laptop screen to guide my pencil. Silk, chiffon, lace, they danced in my mind, begging to come to life. I hid my supplies in a battered shoebox under my bed. Swatches of fabric I'd begged for at fabric stores, stolen moments of inspiration scribbled onto napkins and receipts. Each stolen second felt like breathing after holding my breath too long. Some nights, exhaustion pressed against me so hard I thought I might break. I'd stumble back to my dorm after endless hours of lectures, my body aching for sleep. But as soon as the door clicked shut behind me, my heart would spark to life. I'd pull out my hidden sketches, my secret life, and let my soul pour onto the paper. Stitch by stitch, idea by idea, I was building something no one could see yet. I wasn't just dreaming anymore. I was creating. And every time my pencil touched the page, I felt a little more alive. Weekends became sacred. While my classmates partied or studied, I took the subway to the fashion district. I wandered dusty shops stacked high with bolts of fabric, running my fingers over satins and linens, imagining gowns and suits, coats and dresses. I couldn't afford much. Most days I left empty-handed. But sometimes, just sometimes, I'd find a scrap bin hidden in the back, and for a few crumpled dollars I could claim a treasure. I carried those scraps back to my dorm like precious gems. I spread them out on my bed, matching colors, textures, dreams. No one knew. Not my professors. Not my parents. It was mine. All mine. One evening, after a long day pretending to care about tort law, I found myself staring at my half-finished designs, frustration burning under my skin. It's not enough, I whispered into the silent room. It wasn't enough to sketch. I needed to create something real. Something tangible. I needed to make clothes. The thought terrified me and thrilled me. I had no sewing machine. No proper workspace. No mentor. Just my hands. My stubborn heart. And a head full of dreams. Start anyway, the whisper inside me said. So I did. I borrowed an ancient sewing machine from a kind old librarian who lived in the next dorm building. I stitched in secret, late at night, the whir of the machine muffled by a thick quilt shoved against the door. There were mistakes. So many mistakes. Crooked seams. Broken needles. Ruined fabric. But every error taught me something. And slowly, painfully, gloriously, pieces of my first collection began to take shape. At night, exhausted and exhilarated, I would lie back on my tiny bed, the scent of thread and fabric lingering in the air. One day, I whispered to the ceiling, the world will know my name. And somewhere deep inside, I believed it. Even if no one else did. It started with a flyer. A crumpled, neon pink flyer taped to the wall outside the campus library. Local Creators Fair, open call. Designers, artists, dreamers welcome. My heart skipped a beat. Designers, artists, dreamers. It felt like someone had written it just for me. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the crooked flyer, my textbooks growing heavier in my arms. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I ripped one of the tabs off the bottom. The paper trembled between my fingers as I walked back to my dorm. By the time I reached my room, my mind was a hurricane of doubt. You're not ready, the voice in my head hissed. You're not good enough. I sat on the edge of my bed, the flyer crushed in my hand. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't ready. My stitches were uneven. My designs weren't polished. My fabrics were scraps no one else wanted. But then I thought about my mother tearing up my acceptance letter. I thought about my father's heavy sighs of disappointment. And a different voice rose up, raw, defiant. They don't get to decide when I'm ready. I registered under a fake name, Liz Monroe, because part of me was still afraid. Afraid that someone would recognize me. Afraid that someone would tell my parents. Afraid of failing where people could see. But I sent in the application anyway. And when I got the acceptance email a week later, I cried alone in the stairwell, the metal railing cold against my back. I was in. My very first show. The fair was 2 weeks away. 2 weeks to create something real. Something I wasn't ashamed to hang on a rack. I barely slept. By day, I dragged myself through legal lectures, the words blurring into meaningless noise. By night, I stitched until my fingers bled, until the clock crept past 3:45 a.m. My tiny dorm room transformed into a chaotic studio. Fabric draped over every surface, thread littering the floor like fallen leaves, pins and needles stuck into every available surface. I sewed through exhaustion, through fear, through 100 whispered doubts. And slowly, miraculously, a small collection began to form. 3 dresses, 2 skirts, 1 jacket. Nothing perfect, but they were mine. Every crooked seam, every uneven hem, mine. The night before the fair, I sat cross-legged on my bed, staring at the 6 pieces I'd managed to finish. The soft hum of the sewing machine was finally silent. I should have felt proud. I should have felt excited. Instead, a deep, gnawing terror chewed at my gut. What if no one likes them? I whispered into the darkness. What if they laugh? For a moment, I almost picked up the phone to cancel. I almost let fear win. But then I thought about that little girl with the flashlight, sketching gowns when the world told her no. I owed her more than my fear. I fell asleep clutching the flyer, the words "Dreamer's Welcome" pressing against my heart. And when I woke up the next morning groggy and terrified, I knew one thing. I was going to show up, even if my voice shook, even if my hands trembled, even if no one else believed in me. I was going to show up for myself. The morning of the fair felt like waking up inside a nightmare. My stomach twisted into knots as I hauled my makeshift clothing rack across the uneven pavement of the city square. Around me, dozens of other vendors were already setting up. Painters hanging vibrant canvases, jewelers arranging shimmering necklaces, bakers stacking towers of glossy cupcakes. Everyone looked so confident, so polished, so sure they belonged. I felt like a fraud. My 6 handmade pieces hung awkwardly from the rack, swaying in the chilly breeze. No brand name, no professional tags, just my heart stitched into every seam. I kept my head down as I arranged them, trying to ignore the nagging voice in my head. You don't belong here. They'll see right through you. By 10 o'clock, the square buzzed with people. Families wandered between booths, clutching coffees and laughing. Fashionable women browsed jewelry with critical eyes. Teenagers posed for selfies against colorful murals. And me? I stood behind my tiny booth, heart hammering, palms sweaty, praying no one would stop. Or maybe praying someone would. I couldn't even tell anymore. An hour passed. People glanced at my rack, smiled politely, moved on. No one touched anything. No one asked questions. Each minute stretched into a small eternity. Self-doubt wrapped around me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Maybe they're right, I thought bitterly. Maybe I'm just wasting my time. I was about to start packing up early when I heard a voice. Excuse me, did you make these? I turned around, blinking in surprise. A woman stood there, stylish and poised, her dark hair pulled into a sleek bun, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. Her eyes, sharp, assessing, scanned my collection with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Yes, I croaked, my throat dry. She reached out, running her fingers lightly over the sleeve of my jacket. Interesting lines, she murmured. Unusual fabric choices. Bold. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. No one had ever called my work bold before. Messy, childish, impractical, sure. But bold? What's your name? She asked, flipping open her portfolio. For a moment I hesitated. Liz Monroe, the name on my application, felt foreign in my mouth. Liz, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. She scribbled something into a notebook, then handed me a card. I'm Elena Parker, she said. Talent scout for Revolve magazine. We're hosting an emerging designers feature this spring. I think you should apply. I stared at her, stunned. Me? I stammered. She smiled, not kindly but knowingly. Yes. You're rough. Raw. But there's something here. She tucked the card into my hand and was gone, lost in the crowd before I could even thank her. I stood there, clutching the card like it might disappear, heart thundering in my chest. For a long time I didn't move. The square blurred around me. Colors, sounds, life. But I was frozen in that moment. Someone saw me. Really saw me. Not as a hobbyist. Not as a silly girl chasing dreams. As a designer. As something real. That night, back in my dorm room, I placed Elena's business card on my nightstand, right next to my battered sewing machine. I stared at it for a long time, the words blurring through the tears filling my eyes. Maybe, I whispered into the dark, maybe I do belong after all. And for the first time in my life, I dared to believe it. The days after the fair blurred together in a dizzying rush of adrenaline and fear. I kept Elena's business card tucked safely in the back pocket of my jeans like a secret talisman. Some nights, when exhaustion overwhelmed me, I would pull it out and trace the embossed letters with my fingertip, reminding myself that the opportunity was real. That I was real. Elena had said to submit a portfolio within 4 weeks. 4 weeks. 28 days to prove I was more than a fluke. More than a lucky accident. During the day, I sat through classes on civil procedure and contracts, nodding at professors while my mind raced with sketches and fabric swatches. At night, I transformed into someone else, a woman driven by a hunger so fierce it drowned out fear. My dorm room became a battlefield. Scraps of fabric exploded across the floor. Empty coffee cups stacked into towers on the desk. Pins and needles turned up in my shoes, my sheets, even my hair. Every surface became a workstation. The closet door served as a mood board, plastered with sketches and magazine clippings. My tiny twin bed became a cutting table. I barely slept. I barely ate. Friends texted to check in. Professors pulled me aside, concerned about my fatigue. I smiled. Lied. Kept moving. Every stitch, every design, every sleepless night, it wasn't just for a portfolio. It was my proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that I was good enough. Proof that my dreams were worth fighting for. One night, after a brutal 12-hour sewing marathon, I sat slumped against the wall, my body screaming for rest. The first finished pieces hung neatly from my rack. A fluid silk dress, a structured linen blazer, an edgy denim jumpsuit. I stared at them, vision swimming, heart pounding. Is it enough? I whispered. The silence offered no answers. Only the soft hum of the city outside my window, distant sirens, the muted rumble of traffic, the occasional bark of a stray dog. Life moving forward. Unstoppable. I closed my eyes, letting the city's heartbeat carry me for a moment. Then I stood up. Because giving up was never really an option. Not anymore. Submitting the portfolio felt like setting fire to my soul and tossing it into the universe. I uploaded photos, polished my designs, wrote a trembling cover letter, and hit send before I could chicken out. The second the email whooshed away, I collapsed onto my bed, face buried in the pillow. It was out of my hands now. All I could do was wait. And hope. And fight the fear curling tight in my chest. The next day, sitting in a law lecture about property disputes, my phone buzzed silently in my lap. An email. From Elena. My heart shot into my throat as I slid it open under the desk. We received your portfolio. Impressive work. We'll be in touch soon. I reread the message 3 times, barely breathing. Impressive. She said impressive. For the rest of the lecture, I couldn't hear a word the professor said. All I could hear was my heart whispering. Maybe, just maybe. I'm closer than I thought. That night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, I thought about how far I'd come. From a ripped acceptance letter to a hidden rack of clothes. From stolen scraps to whispered dreams. And now maybe to something real. I smiled into the darkness, exhausted but alive. No matter what happens next, I told myself, I fought for this. I built this. Me. The city breathed around me. And this time, I breathed with it. The email came 3 days later. Congratulations. You've been selected to showcase your collection at Revolve Magazine's Emerging Designers event. I reread it a dozen times, my hands trembling so hard I almost dropped my phone. Selected. Me. Out of hundreds, maybe thousands of applicants. I pressed the phone to my chest and let out a choked laugh. It was happening. It was really happening. The event was scheduled for the following month. Just enough time, barely, to refine my pieces, create a few more, and somehow pull together a presentation that didn't scream first-timer. I threw myself into the work with a desperation that bordered on mania. Classes faded into the background. Assignments were hurried, half-finished, forgotten. Every spare minute was poured into my designs, reworking hems, adjusting cuts, perfecting details. I lived on vending machine coffee and adrenaline. The show became the sun around which my entire world revolved. One evening after a marathon sewing session, I realized I was running out of fabric. Badly. I needed supplies urgently. There was a tiny fabric shop just outside the city that carried high-end scraps at student-friendly prices. I decided to take the risk, even though it meant missing yet another family dinner. I texted my mom. Study group. Don't wait up. A lie. One of many. I shoved my half-finished designs into my bag, grabbed my jacket, and ran for the train. I didn't see them until it was too late. As I rushed out of the fabric shop, arms full of silk and linen bundles, I nearly collided with two familiar figures standing on the sidewalk. My parents. Their faces twisted in confusion, then suspicion as they took in the bolts of fabric, the sewing needles poking out of my bag, the tired gleam in my eyes. "Melissa," my mother said sharply. "What is all this?" For a second I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Everything I'd hidden, everything I'd built, hovered on the edge of collapse. "It's for a school project," I blurted. Lame. Transparent. They weren't buying it. My father's jaw tightened. "We sent you to law school," he said, voice low and shaking. "Not fashion school." My mother looked like she might cry. Or scream. Or both. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. People bustled around us, oblivious to the quiet disaster unfolding on the sidewalk. "Come home," my mother said finally, her voice brittle. "We'll fix this. Before you embarrass yourself. Before you embarrass them." That's what she meant. What she always meant. I clutched the fabric tighter to my chest, feeling the silky weight of my dreams slipping through my fingers. For a moment, I almost gave in. Almost crumpled under the weight of their disappointment, their fear. But then I remembered the little girl sketching under the covers. The young woman sewing until dawn. The designer who had been selected. I straightened my spine. "No," I said, my voice shaking but loud enough to cut through the noise. "I'm not coming home." Their faces hardened into masks of anger and hurt. "You're throwing your life away," my father snapped. "Maybe," I said quietly. "But at least it will be my life." Without another word, I turned and walked away. My hands shook. Tears blurred the streetlights. The weight of the fabric cut into my arms. But my heart, my stubborn, battered heart, burned brighter than it ever had before. That night, back in my dorm, I spread the new fabrics out on my bed. I traced patterns with trembling fingers, letting the colors and textures ground me. "This is my life," I whispered to the empty room. "And I'm not giving it up. Not for anyone." The day of the show arrived, wrapped in icy gray skies and bone-deep fear. I stood backstage at the event hall, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might break through my ribs. Around me, dozens of other young designers buzzed with excitement and nerves, their models adjusting last-minute details, steamers hissing in the corners. My collection, 5 complete looks, hung on a small rack beside me. Every piece was a piece of me. My dreams stitched into fabric. My defiance sewn into every seam. I smoothed the hem of the first dress, my fingers trembling. "Please," I whispered, "just don't let me fall apart." When they called my name, Liz Monroe, my knees almost buckled. I stepped onto the small runway, my mouth dry, my palms slick with sweat. The lights blinded me. The crowd, hundreds of people, became a blur of faces. Somewhere a camera flashed. Somewhere a pen scribbled across a notepad. But I couldn't focus on any of it. All I could do was breathe. Step. Breathe again. The models moved with a grace I could barely believe was real. My clothes, my creations, shimmered under the harsh lights, alive in ways they had never been on a hanger. Gasps rippled through the crowd at the daring cuts, the bold color choices. I caught snippets of murmured conversations as the audience leaned closer. "Who is she? New name? Fresh. Brave. Fresh. Brave." Words I had never allowed myself to believe I could be. Until now. The show lasted only minutes. But it felt like a lifetime. When the final model made her turn and the lights dimmed, I stood frozen for a moment, the applause washing over me like a wave. They were clapping. For me. Tears stung my eyes as I made my way off the stage, heart hammering, soul soaring. I had done it. I had really done it. Backstage was chaos, congratulations, laughter, hugs. I slipped away into a quiet corner, needing a moment to breathe, to absorb everything. That's when I saw her. Elena Parker. Standing near the back, talking to a tall man in a tailored suit. She caught my eye and smiled, a small, knowing smile, before nodding toward the man beside her. A silent introduction. I swallowed hard and walked over, every step feeling surreal. "Liz, this is Daniel Vaughn," Elena said. "Creative director at Orion Fashion House." My heart stumbled in my chest. Orion was huge. An emerging brand exploding onto the international scene. "Daniel loved your work," Elena added casually, like she wasn't dropping a bomb at my feet. Daniel extended his hand, his smile warm but assessing. "You have something," he said simply. "A spark we don't see often. We should talk." I shook his hand, barely able to breathe. "I'd like that," I managed to say, my voice shaking with more emotion than I could hide. Later that night, sitting alone on my dorm room floor, the events of the day spun through my mind like a whirlwind. The applause. The flashes. The opportunity. The possibility. I pulled my sketchbook into my lap, tracing the edges with my fingertips. This is just the beginning, I whispered to the silent room. And for the first time ever I knew it was true. The offer came 3 days later. A formal email from Orion Fashion House. We are pleased to offer you a 6-month design internship beginning this summer in New York City. I stared at the screen, barely breathing. New York. Fashion. My dream within reach. I was shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I had done it. I had broken free. I called Elena first. Congratulations, Liz, she said, her voice warm. You earned this. Own it. Own it. I let the words settle deep into my bones. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't apologizing anymore. This was my life and I was finally living it. The next morning, still buzzing with excitement, I called home. Maybe it was naive. Maybe part of me still hoped they would be proud. That they would hear the joy in my voice and feel it too. I got an internship, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. With Orion Fashion House. In New York. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then my father's voice, cold and sharp. If you walk away from law school, don't bother coming back here. A pause. A cruel, heavy pause. We're done supporting your foolishness. My breath caught. It felt like someone had punched me straight in the chest. Dad, I began. You made your choice, he said, final and brutal. Live with it. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, the silence louder than any scream. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't cry. Not this time. Because deep down I had known this was coming. Choosing myself would always mean losing them. That night, I packed my things in silence. My dorm room, once chaotic with fabric and dreams, now looked bare and hollow. I folded my designs carefully, treating them like fragile artifacts of the war I had just survived. When I finished, I stood by the window, staring out over the city. The lights sparkled like 1,000 tiny promises. Somewhere out there, a new life was waiting for me. One I had built with my own 2 hands. You're stronger than they ever believed, I whispered to my reflection. Stronger than even you believed. And I was. Bruised. Battered. But unbroken. As I boarded the train to New York the next morning, leaving behind everything I once knew, I felt a strange mix of grief and exhilaration. Grieving the life I thought I had to live. Celebrating the life I had chosen for myself. The train lurched forward, carrying me toward the unknown. I didn't know exactly what was ahead. But for the first time, I didn't need to. I just needed to believe. And I did. With every beat of my fiercely stubborn heart. New York was everything and nothing like I expected. Loud. Relentless. Alive. The city didn't care who you were, only who you were willing to become. And I was willing to become everything. The internship at Orion was brutal. Long hours. Grueling critiques. Impossible standards. I was assigned the smallest tasks at first, organizing fabric samples, steaming garments, running errands across the city in heels that shredded my feet. No one cared about my dreams here. No one cared about my past. Only my work. Only my grit. I worked harder than I ever had in my life. I stayed late. I came early. I volunteered for every impossible assignment, every tedious task. And slowly people started noticing. First, a nod from a senior designer. Then a real project, assisting on a spring collection. I poured my soul into it. Every sketch, every fabric choice, every late-night revision, it was my silent rebellion, my quiet revolution. I wasn't just surviving. I was rising. Weeks turned into months. I saw my designs, tiny pieces of them, walk the runways of New York Fashion Week. My name wasn't on the programs yet. Not yet. But it was coming. I could feel it, like electricity humming under my skin. One afternoon, as I was organizing swatches in the design studio, Daniel Vaughn himself walked over. Melissa, he said, my real name, not Liz, we're promoting you to junior designer for the next season. I stared at him, blinking. Junior designer. A real title. A real step. A real beginning. That night, I stood on the rooftop of my tiny walk-up apartment, the lights of the city stretching out endlessly before me. I thought about everything I had lost. My parents. My old life. The safe, small world I had been forced into. And everything I had gained. Freedom. Power. A voice. I pulled out my phone and opened a new email draft. To my parents. I stared at the blank screen for a long time, heart heavy but steady. Finally, I typed. I hope you're well. I'm doing what I love. And I'm happy. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't beg for approval. I didn't need either anymore. I hit send. And for the first time, I truly felt free. The city roared below me, vibrant and unstoppable. And I stood there, stubborn, scarred, shining, ready for everything still to come. Because this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning.